So the question then becomes measurement of cross-platform, which I know is a big topic. Do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, measurement of yeah, I do have some very specific things where we need to start. And I think we've got to start and keep it simple, at least for starters. There are certain metrics that you need, no matter what the platform is. And it's the same metrics, whether you're talking about selling soda or if you're talking about time spent with media. It's all about volume. So there are three measures. You need to know how many, you need to know how often, you need to know how long. Even if you're thinking about it, so that's pretty easy to understand with TV. It's pretty straightforward. You can do the same thing with radio. You can do the same thing with newspapers, and we really have never gotten to the how often and how long part for print. You could do it with online, and you should. So once you have how many, how often, how long for TV, you can do the same thing for internet. You can do the same thing for mobile, and you can start working on a system where you can combine metrics across the different platforms. Now that doesn't mean that's all you need. Each medium has its own characteristic. Online is more interactive than television, at least for the time being. You can measure interactivity, you can measure clicks, click-throughs, click rates, all of the things that you want to measure that make that medium different and unique. But at the end of the day, you need a media plan if you're buying time. And that media plan is going to have some sort of measure of how many, how often, and how long. So, for me, combining across the three media means we need those fundamental metrics first. We don't have them. We don't have how many, how often, and how long in the online space even. It's very difficult to get that for information on a website, for example. So Nielsen can tell me that people spend 3.5 hours a month on video, but they can't tell me if they're watching TV shows. Because when they talk about video, they talk about streams. And I can create a show with 8 streams or 4 streams. It just matters how many times I chop it up to put ads in. So, streams is not really a sensible measure. It has no meaning except that it's what exists between, it's when a piece starts and ends. Some are long, some are short. We need some way to figure that out. Once we can figure that out, we can start combining metrics across video platform. Metrics are across video platforms. And we've been very, we have this proposal which has originated from Jeff Bewkes in our company called TV Everywhere, which was announced and described as a way to try to get TV content on broadband and mobile platforms. That's our vision, or part of our vision for the future. At the same time, Nielsen has got its a measurement solution, which seems to make sense for this sort of business, which is if somebody is watching the closer on broadband while waiting at an airport in Timbuktu, if that computer is registered to somebody who lives in America who's in Nielsen's panel, I will get credit for that. And why shouldn't I? It's the same thing. And the advertiser deserves to see that too. They want to know where their impressions are and who they're getting impressions with. And this is a fairly simple in concept way of putting the things together.
In terms of panel data and fragmentation, do you think that the panel does work? Do you think it needs to be bigger, or do you think that there's another way?
I think there's another way. I think I'm not sure that it needs to be bigger for the businesses I run or for the businesses I view as my main competitors. So if you're talking about the television panel, I'm not worried about, the granularity of measurement of network number 100. That's their problem. I've worked really hard to build my networks up so they are measurable and reportable with some degree of stability. I want to be at the head of the long tail. People who want to be at the tail of the long tail, as far as I'm concerned, they can come up with their own measurement solution, and there are a number of them for them to choose from. But at the same time, I don't know that the companies that are at the head of the tail, the 10, the 15, the 20, the 100, should suffer because the smallest ones don't feel that the sample is big enough to measure their usage. I mean, if I had a network with a very small sample, I don't know that I'd want a very large, with a very small viewer base, I don't know that I'd want a very large sample to let everybody know that it's very small.
And in terms of cross-platform measurement, do you think this is something that would be on one platform, or do you think that there's interest, particularly on the parts of the agencies, for accepting different metrics, different measurements for each of the platform?
I don't think agencies really, you can't do a multi-platform buy. If you want a multi-platform and you want to talk cross-platform, I don't know that, you're gonna want both, okay? And the measurement system shouldn't be restrictive. The measurement system should allow the advertisers who want to take their online impressions and combine them with their television impressions to do so when it makes sense. And at the same time, and that makes sense, in a world where we live in C3. So if the same show is on broadband and somebody watches it as if they were watching it on their DVR, it's essentially the same thing. The screen is a little bit smaller than the big screen you may have at home, or maybe a little bit bigger than some of the screens you have at home. But it doesn't matter to the viewer whether it's delivered on broadband or if it's delivered on TV. They're watching the show. Now, what happens after 3 days? That ad inventory really doesn't have any more commercial value. I can swap it out. The technology allows me to insert ads in VOD or in broadband, as long as there's a business model that's big enough to support it, and have a reporting structure that allows me to say how many impressions you get, and we do. But it isn't done through Nielsen. It's done through publishing systems like DART, which we use to guarantee online video